Your Bibles to Matthew 13. Matthew 13. I would encourage you, if you have a Bible, to go ahead and turn there. We're going to be there for the entirety of our lesson this morning. I'm very excited about presenting these thoughts. I know some lessons require that we bounce around between various different passages, and sometimes in order to understand God's will, we need to be able to put a collection of passages together. My favorite way to study, though, is to just open up the Word and start reading. To just be able to take in a text, to be able to really spend some time in a certain place. And that's what I want to do with you this morning from Matthew 13. We're going to be looking at the kingdom parables. Matthew 13 gives us a collection of parables. The verses that I put up to start with are not the actual parables. They're some of the information Jesus gives in between the parables. And I wanted to start by just reading some of that. But before we even do that, just to catch up on the position, the time in which Jesus tells these parables, what's going on, because I think it's significant. We know this happens after the limited commission. That's back in chapter 12. When you get into, I'm sorry, that's actually before 12. I think that's 10. Yeah, chapter 10. When you get to chapter 12, however, you can see that Jesus is, maybe we could say, stepping up the rhetoric a little bit. He's starting to be a little bit more clear and a little bit more harsh. There's times where we see Jesus being just amazingly merciful and gentle with people. And then there's times like where we're going to get to in Matthew 23, where he is dropping the hammer. I mean, he's dropping the hammer. He's calling them brood of vipers and whitewashed tombs and hypocrites and brood of vipers, all of these things. Chapter 12 to me is a place where he's kind of ramping up toward that. He's ramping up toward what's going to happen in 23. You can see him in verse 33 through 37, where he's talking about how a tree will be known by its fruits. A tree will be known by its fruits. That's in chapter 12. What is he alluding to there? But the fact that there's good trees and bad trees, and that we need to be able to identify the good from the bad. We need to be able to see the fruit of what's taking place in a person's life, from a person's teaching, and we need to be able to determine from that whether this person is someone that's speaking God's truth or not. You see also the sign of Jonah in verse 38 and following, where Jesus is calling them an evil and adulterous generation because they were seeking a sign. They were looking for something. And of course, we know Jesus is working countless signs, countless wonders. If anyone had their eyes open, they would have seen what he was, who he was. And yet here on this occasion, they asked for another sign. And it's interesting in the Bible, so very often when people when people try to make demands of God, God just says no. You don't get to make demands of me. But if a person has a good and honest heart, if a person is willing to listen, God will show amazing things. God does amazing things for people who have the right attitude. But again, just to make the point that you see him kind of starting to be more clear, starting to be a little bit harsher with some of the religious rulers of the day, all the way to the end of chapter 12, where someone stretches out their hand there in verse 49. Before that, I beg your pardon, to verse 46. While he's speaking, behold, his mother and his brother stand outside and wanted to speak with him. And he replied to the man who told him this, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" And stretching out his hand toward the disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and my sister and my mother." So he, not that he was, turning this back on his earthly connections, but he wanted people to know that more important than his earthly relationships are you going to hear my words and do the will of the Father? Are you going to listen? And the reason I feel like all that's important is because chapter 13 begins with the phrase, that same day. That same day. So everything that we're going to look at in chapter 13 happens right on the heels of that. The main point being that if you will just hear and do the will of my Father, you can be my brother and my sister and my mother. You can be a part of my family, is what he's saying. So in the verses that I have on the board right now, you can see there in verse 1 of chapter 13, Jesus going out of the house, he sits beside the sea, which is just a beautiful picture to try to get in your mind. Jesus sitting beside the sea. We have the Sermon on the Mount, which conjures up a beautiful image. This sermon by the sea conjures up a beautiful picture as well. A great crowd gathers around him, so he gets into a boat and he sits down, and the whole crowd then is on the beach. So Jesus now out on the boat, the crowd on the beach. If you can just get that picture in your mind, this is where he's telling all of these things. This is where he's communicating this beautiful picture that the Bible is painting for us there. And then verse 3 says, he spoke or told them many things in parables. And that's what we're going to be talking about this morning, the parables that he told on this occasion. So just pause there for a second, go forward to verse 10. The disciples, after this first parable, said, why do you speak to them in parables? And I know this is something that is interesting to consider. Why parables? Why not be clearer? Why not be more plain? Why use these parables that you have to kind of mull around and kick around in your mind to be able to get the meaning? And Jesus says, well, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom, but to them it has not been given. For to the one who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But to the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. Indeed, in the case of the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled that says, you will hear, but never understand. You will indeed see, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull with their eyes, and with their eyes they can hardly or barely hear. With their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous people have longed to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and did not hear it. So the answer to the question where they are asking, why parables? Why are we speaking in parables? And Jesus says, basically, well, I'm trying to communicate important thoughts. I'm trying to communicate things that really matter. And some people are just hard-hearted. Some people that they just aren't trying to hear. Those people who you ask him for a sign, the sign of Jonah, they weren't really interested. They didn't really want to believe. Their eyes were closed so that they could hardly see, and their ears were closed lest they should begin to hear. Jesus speaks in parables so that then the ones who are listening, the ones who are really listening, as we get into these first parables especially, the ones who are really listening, they can get it. They can figure it out. They can understand. They can see. They can hear. And it is an interesting tool that Jesus uses. And really what he's asking us to do is to apply ourselves. He's asking us to apply ourselves. This is one of the most amazing things I think about the way God has communicated the gospel message to us. He uses words to communicate his message. And these words are so powerful. They're so powerful. The foolishness of the message preached is the tool by which God chose to save us. He could have done a lot of different things, but this is what he chose. And when we put these words in our hearts and we think about them and we meditate on them, we can understand. We can start to get the picture. We can start to see. But he doesn't just give us the information. He doesn't just beam it into our minds. He wants us to put in the work. And this is what parables do, is they allow us to see if we're willing to see, if we're willing to put in the work. And he says there at the end, verse 16, blessed are you because you do see and you do hear. I hope that we can all be in this category of people who they are seeing and are hearing, because that's what God wants from us. That's what he wants, is that we will have open eyes, open ears to be able to receive his word. This is the same thing that James speaks about in James chapter 1, that we will be people who are effectual hearers. Again, back to verse 50 of chapter 12, people who do the will after they've heard it. Now, you saw in there in verse 15 where he speaks of these people who are hard-hearted. If they would, said, see and hear, then they could turn. They would be able to understand. They're in the middle of verse 15. If they would just open their eyes, if they would just open their ears, then they could understand. And if they did that, then they could turn. Look at verse 15, and I would heal them. So there's still hope for these people. There's still hope if they would just open their eyes, if they would just open their ears, they could be healed. And I think that point can be made from a few of the parables that we're going to look at. It's up to us. It's up to individuals. Are you going to listen or not? Are you going to open your heart and strive to understand and turn so that he can heal you or not? And then picking up down in verse 34, all these things Jesus said to the crowd in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter what has been hidden since the foundation of the world. If you think about what Jesus is doing here, the kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like. They have been hearing about the kingdom of heaven for generations and generations and generations. There's a kingdom coming. There's a kingdom coming. And they had a lot of misconceptions about that kingdom. Most of them, I think, you go back and you read the historical record, and you can even see it from their reactions to Jesus' teaching. They were expecting somebody to come that would reconstitute David's kingdom, Solomon's kingdom, and lead them in victory over the Romans. That's what they were expecting, that kind of a kingdom. And so these parables are helping those who would listen, those who would have open hearts, to understand his kingdom's not going to be like that. His kingdom's not going to be of this world. His kingdom's going to be different. And so the parables that he's telling is to try to help them to understand, as he says here, things that have been hidden since the foundation of the world. A lot of this information, a lot of what we know and understand because of Matthew 13, we just about take for granted. We've all grown up with it. It's information that we've processed several times. But this it was earth shattering to them. It was completely revolutionary to them that the kingdom of heaven is not going to be of this world. But we see so many clues to it. It does fit with all of the Bible narrative. Again, if someone had an open heart and an open mind, they could see these things. Just going back to verse 17 for just a second, he says, "Truly, I say to you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it." Think about all the prophets that God delivered parts and pieces of his message through. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, amazing prophecies of this kingdom that was happening now, that was about to happen right now. And they didn't understand. They wanted to see it. They strove to see it, but they could only see their part. They could only see their piece. And now it's all coming together. Now it's going to be revealed. It's a beautiful, beautiful picture. So with all of these parables, that's what we're looking at. The kingdom of heaven is being explained to us in so many different ways. So first, I've got these broken into categories. It's going to change a little bit the order that he presented them. But first, I want to talk about the parable of beginnings. Beginnings, the most probably well-known, oft-quoted parable from this chapter. You see the sower. The sower goes out to sow. You see the four different soils here pictured. You have the soil on the path, or the downtrodden path. You have the rocky ground. You have the thorns. And then you have the good soil. And again, this is one that we've processed so many times, and we've thought about it so many times, that when the disciples ask for an explanation, it's hard for us to understand. How could they not get it? Obviously the seed is the word of God. Obviously these things make sense. But remember, we have the explanation. If you come down to verses 18 through 23, this is the inspired explanation of this. We don't have to wonder. We can see the point. So let's get into it just a little bit. He says, verse 19, "When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown on the path." So you have the path, you have the wayside soil. On a path, you see the ground beaten down so much that grass can't even grow on it sometimes. You go sometimes to a beaten down path, and you could almost hit it with a hammer, and you can feel it almost rock solid because it's so beaten down. No seed is going to be able to grow there because of how beaten down it is. And you have degrees of that, obviously. You can have a path that's more beaten down than another. And with that image, I think what you see is you see the condition of a person's heart. How receptive is their heart to the truth? And what would be the picture of the heart, the soil getting beaten down to the point where it cannot receive a seed? It cannot receive any seed. Well, you hear this teaching, this doctrine, that doctrine. You hear all the wisdom of the world, all the different wisdoms of the world, and your heart gets hardened toward receiving the truth. And in this picture, and even if you go back to the beginning there, it's the birds came. The birds came and devoured them. And in verse 19, he says, well, that's the evil one. That's Satan doing what Satan does, is before the heart could ever be softened to the point where it could receive the seed, Satan comes and snatches it away. It takes it away before they have a chance to think about it. Then with the rocky soil, he describes them as not having much soil, but the seed does spring up. The seed springs up because it has no depth of soil. Then, as you read the explanation, verse 21, he has no root in himself, endures for a while, but when tribulation arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. So the rocky soil is one where there's enough there for the seed to spring up, for it to start to grow, but not enough for it to last, not enough for it to endure. Once the going gets tough, it dries up, it withers, and is not able to make it. So then the thorny soil. The other seed, verse 7, grows or falls among the thorns. When that's being explained, he says, this is the one who hears, verse 22, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. So here, what are the thorns? The thorns are the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches. So what's happening with this soil? It's good soil. It's fine soil. The seed is growing there, but other things are growing too. The cares and concerns of the world are growing. The deceitfulness of riches are growing, and they're taking away the nutrients. They're taking away the good from the soil, so the seed is muted. The ability of the seed to grow is muted because it's taking care of these other things. This is the picture of a Christian who, yes, he has the word in his heart. Yes, it's growing, but he's trying to keep one foot in the world while keeping one foot in the kingdom. And because of that, the ability of the seed to really grow in his life is compromised. And the problem there in the end of verse 22 is it proves unfruitful. Think about that. Proves unfruitful. Then you have the good soil, obviously, which produces grain, some 60, some 30, some 100. And Jesus says, let him who has ears to hear, let him hear. I think that ultimately is the main point. The main point is hear the word. There's so many ancillary points off of this that are fascinating to think about. I think I've made this point in here before, but when I read this as a young man, as a child, you read it and you say, okay, well, you got four soils. You're one or the other. Which one am I? Good soil. I think I'm the good because I'm listening. I'm the good seed because I'm listening. Well, that's a simplified, correct answer. But as you dig into it, think about the soil's descriptions and realize that just because you are the wayside soil doesn't mean you have to stay that way. Just because you are the rocky soil doesn't mean you have to stay that way. Just because you are allowing thorns to grow in your life doesn't mean you have to stay that way. If we can remove the thorns, the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches. We can remove that from ourselves so we can be more fruitful. If there are rocks that are preventing depth of faith, let's remove those rocks. Let's take them out. If the soil of our heart is so packed down that the word can't grow within us, then we can break that soil up. We can plow that soil so that it can be receptive to the word. This is also a powerful analogy for us thinking about how to reach others with the word. If you're talking to somebody whose heart is just so packed down that they're so hardened that they can't receive the soil, well, you need to start there. You need to try to break up some furrows in their heart so that the seed can find a place to grow, or remove the rocks, remove the thorns to allow them to be fruitful. That's what we want to be. We want to be fruitful, and we want to help others to be fruitful. It's a powerful thing to meditate on, and I think honestly, as you as we look at ourselves in that parable, everyone here, I believe everyone here, to some degree or another, has the seed growing in their heart. To some degree or another, you have the good word growing in your heart. And so you can ask yourself, are there rocks in my life that are preventing the depth of soil? Are there thorns in my life that are keeping the seed from growing as much as it should, keeping me from being fruitful? Is my heart too hardened to even allow the seed to really thrive? Is Satan taking it away from me before I have a chance to listen? I think all of us need to be looking at taking away the rocks and pulling out the weeds and trying to be the kind of person that God wants us to be more and more every day, more and more fruitful every day. It's a beautiful parable, a beautiful point that's made. And the ideal, again, is we need to listen. We've got to hear. We need to hear what the Father is trying to communicate to us. So the kingdom is one. The kingdom is that which grows in a person's heart. It grows in their life. In verse 31, and this is skipping ahead past the parable of the weeds, which we'll get to just now. Very simple parable here in verse 31. It says, the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It's the smallest of all seeds, but when it is grown, it is larger than all garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air can come and make nests in its branches. I think that's just a beautiful thing to think about. It's fun, powerful that something so short, a short parable, could have such a great meaning for us. The ideal here, I think, is at least twofold. The kingdom that Jesus was about to begin, the kingdom that was going to start on the day of Pentecost, was going to start out very small. It was going to start out with just a few men preaching a sermon. And almost before the day is done, you have 3,000 souls who have responded. You have it growing. Before that generation was complete, you had the gospel going to every creature on earth. That's just such an amazing thing to think that within that generation, the gospel had grown to the point where the kingdom was in every place. In some way, the kingdom was there. The kingdom had been taught. Men had responded. And so the idea then that it growing to the point where birds of the air can come and take shelter in its branches, the kingdom of Christ is all over the globe. Right now, today, it survives all over the globe. And the kingdom of Christ is a benefit to people all over the globe. And the kingdom of Christ continues to reach out and help people all over the globe. If they will listen, if they will open their hearts, the gospel is there, because this tree has grown from such humble beginnings to touch every part of the globe. I think also we can see the kingdom in this way in our own lives. Recognize in our own lives, listening to the Lord, just something as simple as, let him who has ears to hear, let him hear. Just listen. If you will listen, if you will let the word of God take root in your life, it may seem very, very small. It may seem very insignificant, but as you allow it to grow, pull the thorns, pull the rocks, take care, tend to the soil. As you do that, the tree can grow to the point where your life is a blessing to many, where your life can be something that blesses people that you come in contact with. That's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. And you connect that with the idea from the parable of the sower of some producing 30-fold and 60 and 100, and thinking, how much fruit can I bear for the Lord? How many people can I help? Shouldn't that be what we're desiring? I want to listen to the Master. I want to transform my life as much as possible so that I can be as much of a benefit to others as I possibly can. So we continue to grow to the point where the birds of the air, the people around us, are benefited because the gospel growing in our lives. That's a beautiful picture. It's a beautiful picture that we all should strive for. The very next verse, I think I messed up the verse just a little bit there. Sorry about that. With the leaven in verse 33, another parable he tells them, also very short. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour until it was all leavened. That's all he says. Think about the simplicity of that. And think about, again, he's using pictures, he's using images that we know. So how much leaven is enough? If you're making a loaf of bread, how much leaven do you use? Compared to all the other ingredients, very little, right? Very little leaven. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. That's all you need is a very little. This is a powerful analogy, because what he's saying is all you need is that seed, that little seed from the mustard tree. You just need that little seed, and it can affect the whole lump. It can have an amazing effect on everything that it touches. And we can see this. We can see this in the world that we're living in. We can see it on a small level in our day-to-day lives. When you see someone who is living the love of Christ in their life, does it not affect everyone around them? Does it not have a beautiful effect on everyone around them when you see the love of Christ in someone's life? Just that little bit of leaven can affect so much. And he describes it as all being leavened until it was all leavened. What would happen if you just say, took that little bit of leaven, same little bit of leaven that could affect the whole lump, but instead I'm going to put it in a capsule. I'm going to put it in a capsule and then mix it in. So all the leaven stays in that capsule. Yeah, it's in the loaf. It's in the loaf, but it hasn't affected the loaf. It hasn't really had its effect because it's all locked up in that capsule. It would do no good. In order for the leaven to do good, it's got to be mixed in. It's got to go out and it's got to touch this part and touch that part. And this is something that I think we as Christians need to be recognizing, is the leaven that we can offer to the world, the good that we can offer to the world, is of no value unless it's out there, unless it's in the world. We cannot remove ourselves from the world. Obviously, we have to be careful that we are not influenced negatively by the world. We've got to protect ourselves against that. But I think sometimes what Christians do is we have our light shining really, really brightly, and then we hide it under a bushel, right? We take that light and we hide it and we protect that light. Well, now it's not giving light to anyone. It's not benefiting anyone. That's not what Jesus wants. He wants us to be branches that the birds of the air, the people of the world can take shelter in. He wants us to be leaven that affects those around us in a positive way. Yes, we have to protect ourselves against the leaven affecting us in a negative way, the evil leaven affecting us in a negative way. But we need to be trying to get out there. We need to be trying to affect those around us. These are parables about the beginnings of the kingdom, how the kingdom begins, how it was going to begin in general, and also how it begins in a person's life. These next two parables speak of value, the value of the kingdom. Also very simple parables. You see the parable of the hidden treasure. You see the parable of the pearl of great price, the pearl of great value. In both of these parables, we see the man who finds the treasure, the man who finds the pearl of great value, selling all that he has to get the thing of great value. And that's really the main point of both of these parables. The main point is the kingdom is of such value that we should be willing to give up whatever it takes to grab it. Whatever it takes to grab it, we should be willing. If it means I have to walk away from family connections, so be it. If it means at some point I may have to lose my job, so be it. If it means at some point I may have to face persecution, I may have to face death, so be it, because the value of this is so much greater than anything else. And that's just the simple point of both of these things. Now, the differences of the parables are also interesting. And I think y'all have heard my take on this before too. But with the parable of the hidden treasure, the man accidentally finds it. He accidentally finds it. Now, when he finds it, he's able to recognize the value, that's what we've got to do. When we see the truth, we've got to recognize its value. But this man who finds the treasure hidden in a field, he wasn't looking for that. He was not looking for the treasure. He just found it. Once he found it, to his credit, he recognized the value and did what it took to seize the value. The man seeking fine pearls, what's the difference? So this is a man who he believes there has to be something of great value out here. There has to be something that is worth everything to get. And he's seeking that. He's looking for it. I know y'all have heard me say before, but I feel like my dad is an example of one who was seeking fine pearls. And when he had done with college and was starting his adult life, he was looking for the truth. He was looking for the truth, and he was looking for it in a lot of different places. He found the truth about the same time he found my mom, which was really good for me, but that's how that went down. But he was willing, once he found the truth, once he found that pearl of great price, to make whatever sacrifices were necessary to hang on to it. And that's the point, really, of both of these parables. And it's a beautiful picture. And again, for us to know this is how we need to behave. When we need to grab a hold of the thing of great value, which is the gospel, which is the kingdom, and never let it go. This last category that I have, I guess there's one more beyond this, but this is the last category with multiple parables. We have the parable of the tares, or the parable of the weeds. So let's go back. This parable is told beginning in verse 24 through 30. And again, this is one of those that I guess I've just thought about it so much that when the apostles asked for an explanation, I kind of throw my hands up and like, how do they not understand? How do they not get it? Because it seems so simple. But you see the kingdom of heaven compared to a man who goes out and sows good seed. While his men were sleeping, an enemy came in and sowed weeds, verse 25. So the plants came up and bore grain, but the weeds appeared also. The weeds appeared also. So what do we have here? We have competing seeds. We have the good seed, and then we have the seeds that are producing weeds. And he immediately identifies in verse 28, an enemy has done this. And the servant said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? Shall we go ahead and pluck them up now? Pull the weeds up now? And he says, no, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let them both grow together until harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers to gather the weeds first, bind them in bundles to be burned, and gather the wheat into my barn. So again, when you come forward to the explanation, it's really powerful how Jesus explains this. The disciples ask for it, and Jesus he starts listing it off. Verse 37, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed is the sons of the kingdom. If anyone will listen to the seed that the Son of Man sowed, he is a son of the kingdom. That's some beautiful language I want you to hang on to for a minute. We can be sons of the kingdom if we'll listen to the good seed. The weeds are sons of the evil one. If you listen to the seeds that the devil is sowing, the wisdom of the world and these other doctrines that didn't come from God, false gospels, then you are sons of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. It's so straightforward, right? The devil is out there spreading lies. The devil is out there spreading false doctrine. This is why, as Galatians 1 points out, if anyone comes preaching any other gospel other than what we've already received, we have to consider that person to be accursed. We can't listen to another gospel because we have the one true gospel. Anything else is from the devil. And then he says, the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. So here we see this. Once you identify, okay, this is what's what, then it all makes sense. But in this explanation, he goes on to explain about the judgment. Verse 40, just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, the reapers, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and lawbreakers and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. You think about the language of that. It's a beautiful picture. Obviously, the judgment scene is a scary thing. We don't want to be the wrong seed. We don't want to be listening to the wrong seed. We want to be growing the good seed that comes from the Son of Man in our lives. We want to be listening to the truth, to the one true gospel, because if we're not, we're going to be burned in a place where he describes as having weeping and gnashing of teeth. Look at verse 41. He's going to gather out of the kingdom, all causes of sin and lawbreakers. Anyone who causes sin, anyone who causes lawbreaking, that's got to be pulled out of the kingdom. They're going to be pulled out at the end of time. And then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. That's language I really want you to carry with you this day. The righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. And again, he says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. The very powerful scene that he's describing here. There will be a separation. There will be this harvest that's coming. Clearly, we can see this main point being that we've got to hear, we've got to listen, we've got to be that good seed. Now, the next parable overlaps with this one a little bit. The parable of the net is quite a bit shorter. And you can see that down in verse 47. The kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. When it was full, men drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good into containers, but threw away the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This parable, I think, helps us to understand part of the judgment scene from the parable of the weeds. Part of what we need to understand, just look at the parable detail by detail. Verse 47: the kingdom of heaven is like a net which is thrown into the sea. So, what's the sea? What is the sea in this parable? You have the kingdom of heaven is like a net. The kingdom is the net. The sea is the world. Right? Got to be the world. The net thrown into the world, and it gathers only good fish, right? Only the good. It's interesting that that's not what happens. The net gathers fish of all kinds. All kinds. So the kingdom of heaven thrown out into the world is going to gather fish of all kinds. This is the same picture of the weeds growing with the good seed. It's the same picture, because then the sorting has to take place. That's what this parable is really all about. The kingdom of heaven gathers fish of every kind, and then at the end of time, they have to be sorted. He's going to sort out the good from the bad. This is something that I think all of us need to take very seriously, because you can be in the kingdom, you can be gathered up into the net of the kingdom of the church, and still be sorted out as bad at the end of time. We've got to make sure we're listening to our master. We got to make sure we're following his words, taking care to hear and do, so that we are not sorted out at the end of time. So back to the parable of the tares for one more point. Why allow the tares? Why allow the weeds to grow with the good seed? And why allow the net to gather in good and bad? Why not just make a net that only gathers good? Why not only gather good? Why allow the weeds to grow with the good seed? If you look in the parable, Jesus says, well, if we pull out the weeds now, we may affect some of the good. We may hurt some of the good. And so let them alone. I think as you plug that question into our knowledge of the Bible, what we realize is the weeds don't always have to stay weeds, any more than the rocky soil has to stay the rocky soil, or the thorny soil has to stay the thorny soil. The weeds can change. The weeds could change and start listening to the good seed if they want to. And God is giving time for that to happen. God is giving time for that to take place. It's really basically the same question as, why does God allow evil to exist in this world? Why does God allow pain and suffering to exist in this world? He's giving all men a chance to repent. Go and read 2 Peter 3. Nevertheless, there will be a judgment coming. There will be a time where the good are sorted from the bad within the kingdom. The final parable that I want to point out here in Matthew 13 is a parable of the new and the old. I was talking through this with my dad this morning, and I think this is one that I just almost never hear mentioned. I don't think I can even remember a time of hearing this one talked about very much. I love it. It begins in verse 51. He says, "Have you understood all these things?" And they said, "Yep, got it all, no problem." This is one of those things where, when you read the Bible, you study the Bible, you can think you've got it all, and then you read it again and like, oh, wow, man, I missed that last time. That's an amazing point. How did I miss that all these years? They got it. They understood it. They were honest-hearted, and they were getting what they could at the time. But after the day of Pentecost, you tell them the same story, and they're going to get a little bit more. And after they'd preached for about 10 years or so, you ask them about this and they'd have a little bit more. And I think that's part of what we have to understand is the seed is supposed to be constantly growing in our lives. We're supposed to constantly be trying to produce more and more and more fruit. John 15, if we're a branch on him that produces fruit, that's good. You're not going to get cut off. You're not going to get burned, but he is going to prune you so that you can bear more fruit. And that's part of the idea. But then in this next verse, he says to them, every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of God is like a master of a house who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. And I think that's worth meditating on. I'd like to leave some thoughts with you about that. I just think it's powerful to think about how the kingdom of heaven, it's a seed. It's the good seed that the Son of Man sows, and it does grow in our lives, and it produces sons of God. It produces children of God when the good seed is in your life. But also, each of us bring our individuality to the kingdom. Each of us bring who we are to the kingdom. And God can use that. God can use your past experiences, positive and negative. He can use, think about Saul of Tarsus. Saul of Tarsus. He grew up educated, highly educated in the law of Moses. He knew the law of Moses. And what does God do but allow him to be a powerful teacher, a powerful preacher for that law? Saul did regard all things in his life to be rubbish in order to gain Christ. He recognized the value, and he was willing to sacrifice it all to gain the kingdom. But he still brought along with him who he was and used who he was in the kingdom. And I think that's what this parable is describing, is when we come to the kingdom, we come with our individuality, and then God can use that. God can use that. So if you've struggled with a certain sin, you've struggled maybe mightily with a certain sin, but now the kingdom is growing in you. Now the seed is in your life. Well, obviously you've got to continue to fight that sin, continue to not give in to that sin. But what now can you do? You can use that experience. You can use that knowledge of how you overcame that sin to help others that you see dealing with that sin. I think this is at least part of what we're supposed to get from this parable. I appreciate so much your attention. I know I went long. Let me do this. I'm going to be preaching again this evening, and those who have worshiped here for a while know what we used to do is I would preach a sermon in the morning, and then we would come back and visit it in the evening, and you'll have an opportunity to give me thoughts, give me verses that you think plug in with these thoughts. So that's what we're going to do tonight. If you have any thoughts, comments, verses that you feel like connect to what we've been talking about, let me have those notes, and I'll try to use that in the lesson this evening. Also, we're going to be adding a few parables to these thoughts. So a few parables that connect to these thoughts, we'll add that as well this evening as we come back on these things. So I'll leave it with you now for the morning. I appreciate so much your attention. We will be singing an invitation song. If you know for whatever reason that your life is not right with the Lord, you have an opportunity now. You can come forward. You can make confession. If you've never given your life to Jesus, you have that opportunity as well. Whatever the case may be, we'd ask you to consider that. And if you need to come forward, please do so as we stand and sing.